My name is Cassandra, and I never imagined that one day I would be threatened with unemployment, screamed at in front of my students, and nearly assaulted, because a child's phone ran out of memory. I have always believed in the value of education, in shaping young minds and giving them tools to navigate this messy world. That belief brought me to a modest but bustling primary school, where I taught multiple classes, ran between classrooms, and gave my energy to every lesson with everything I had. I was organized, thorough, and committed, but no amount of preparation could have braced me for what happened that Wednesday afternoon. The day started like any other. I had just wrapped up a lesson on creative writing with a group of excitable third graders when the receptionist walked in and gestured toward the door. "There's a parent here to speak with you," she mouthed. I immediately assumed it was about grades or classroom behavior, nothing out of the ordinary. I wiped my hands on a paper towel, straightened the edge of my sweater, and stepped into the hallway, expecting a calm, responsible adult waiting to discuss her child's progress. What I encountered instead felt like the opening scene of a surrealist nightmare. The woman stood with her arms crossed, eyes already blazing with fury, as if she had been rehearsing her anger the entire car ride over. I'd barely had time to greet her before she launched into an accusation that left me completely unmoored. She demanded to know what I was going to do about her son's phone. I blinked, unsure whether I had misheard or misunderstood, and asked for clarification. That was when she, with unwavering conviction, told me that I owed her money for a new smartphone because her son's had died. Not physically damaged or stolen, but because of me. Because, according to her, I had destroyed the phone with my homework assignments. I stood frozen for a second, my mind racing. I asked her if this was a joke. She didn't flinch. She said it as seriously as if I had broken into their home and smashed the device myself. She insisted that my unreasonable amount of homework had filled up the phone's memory, that her son was forced to take too many photos of other students' diaries since he was too busy to write the homework down himself, and now the phone wouldn't even turn on. She blamed me for not accounting for how much storage modern phones had. She claimed that because I was so obsessed with students doing all tasks precisely and perfectly, her son had no choice but to photograph everything, and now his phone, a brand new model, was dead. My mouth hung open. It felt like I had been swept into a storm of absurdity, a situation so bizarre that my brain struggled to find logic in it. I explained calmly at first that all homework was recorded either in their personal diaries or uploaded to the electronic journal system used by the school. That if her son had chosen not to write anything down and instead cluttered his phone with hundreds of photos, that was neither instructed nor encouraged by me. I even added that many students managed just fine using traditional pen and paper. But the woman would not hear it. Her voice rose higher, her gestures sharper. She shouted about emotional damage, and how her son had cried because the phone was his favorite possession and now it was gone. She demanded I pay the full price of the device or she would file a formal complaint. I stood there, every nerve in my body tightening, trying to keep my composure in the face of this ridiculous outburst. I told her that I would not be paying for something that was never my responsibility to begin with. That if her child chose to use a phone in ways that weren't advised or approved by the school, that was a parental matter, not an educational one. What happened next still haunts me in flashes. Her face twisted with rage and disbelief. She screamed at me, called me unprofessional, unfit, accused me of targeting her child, and then, without warning, she raised her hand like she was about to strike me. My instincts kicked in before my mind could fully process the danger. I backed away and sprinted down the hall to the administrative office, heart thudding in my chest, breath ragged. I yelled for security. Within seconds, our school's contracted security guard was between us, escorting her out while she continued to throw threats like knives over her shoulder. She said I would lose my job. She said she would make sure no school ever hired me again. She said that teachers like me destroyed lives and deserved to be punished. I stood there, shaking, as the door finally closed behind her and her voice faded into the muffled roar of the outside world. My colleagues came over to check on me, their expressions a mix of concern and disbelief, but I could barely hear them. I was stuck in my head, repeating the confrontation over and over, trying to make sense of how someone could genuinely believe that a teacher should be financially liable for a smartphone's storage running out. It was absurd. It was offensive. And worst of all, it was real. That night, I sat in my apartment with a cup of untouched tea cooling beside me. I stared at the wall, still in my work clothes, unable to relax, unable to laugh it off. I kept telling myself it was just a bad day, an unfortunate encounter with an unreasonable parent. But there was a pit in my stomach, a heaviness that I could not ignore. This was more than just an awkward conversation. This was a woman who, without hesitation, believed that verbal abuse and public humiliation were acceptable ways to resolve a personal grievance. This was a mother who thought her child's inability to write in a notebook meant I had to pay for a replacement phone. This was a real person, standing in front of me, screaming and swinging because I did my job. I am not new to parent-teacher tensions. I have handled complaints about grades, teaching methods, even unfair seating arrangements. But this was different. This was lunacy disguised as entitlement. And as much as I tried to dismiss it, I could not shake the feeling of dread. The fear that people like her were becoming more common, that being a teacher no longer shielded me from blame when technology failed, when children cut corners, or when parenting fell short. I have replayed that day too many times, wondering if I missed a sign, a warning, a way to prevent what happened. But there was none. It came out of nowhere. And I am left with the lingering disbelief that this happened at all. That a mother tried to hold me financially and emotionally accountable for her own inability to teach her son how to write down his assignments. I am Cassandra. And to this day, I am still shocked that it really happened to me. Update 1. I barely slept that night. My mind kept replaying the moment her hand lifted, the echo of her voice in the hallway, the way security had to physically place themselves between us. By morning, I told myself that at least the school would handle this appropriately. There were cameras. There were witnesses. I had done nothing wrong. I went to work with that thin, fragile hope clinging to me, the kind you hold onto when reality has not yet finished unfolding its cruelty. I had just started setting up materials for my first class when the secretary appeared in the doorway and told me the principal wanted to see me immediately. Her tone was neutral, almost rehearsed, and that alone made my stomach tighten. I remember walking down the corridor feeling like every step was heavier than the last, my mind racing through possible reasons. I assumed it would be about filing an incident report, documenting what happened, reassuring me that the parent would be banned from school grounds. I was wrong in a way that still feels unreal when I think about it. When I entered the principal's office, the first thing I saw was her. Sitting calmly in a chair, legs crossed, phone in hand, completely relaxed. The same woman who had screamed at me, threatened me, and tried to hit me the day before. She did not look ashamed or embarrassed. She looked victorious. The principal gestured for me to sit, his expression stiff and distant, and immediately began explaining that the situation had escalated unnecessarily because of my behavior. That alone made my head spin. I was told that as an educator, I should have been more flexible, more understanding, more willing to de-escalate by simply taking responsibility. Then came the words that truly knocked the air out of me. He said that to resolve the conflict and avoid further complaints, I needed to apologize to the mother and compensate her financially for the repair or replacement of her son's phone. My ears rang. I felt heat rush to my face, a mix of disbelief and humiliation. I was being asked to apologize for being attacked. I was being told to pay money because a child filled his phone memory with photographs instead of writing homework down like every other student. I refused immediately. Not calmly, not diplomatically, but firmly, because there was no universe in which this made sense. I explained again that homework was provided through official channels, that phone usage was never required, that what happened was not only absurd but dangerous. I reminded him that she raised her hand at me, that security had removed her, that this was not a misunderstanding but a clear act of aggression. The mother sat there the entire time with a tight, satisfied smile, occasionally shaking her head as if I were the unreasonable one. That was when the principal's tone changed completely. He said that my refusal showed a lack of professionalism and an unwillingness to cooperate with parents. He said the school could not afford scandals or complaints. He said that if I was not willing to smooth things over, then perhaps I was not the right fit for the institution. And just like that, in a voice stripped of empathy or hesitation, he told me I was being dismissed effective immediately. It felt like the floor dropped out from under me. Fired. Not suspended. Not investigated. Fired. Over a phone. Over a lie. Over a situation where I was the one threatened. As he spoke, everything suddenly clicked into place. The confidence on her face. The way the principal avoided eye contact. The speed at which the decision had been made. I understood then, with sickening clarity, that this woman had not come back for justice. She had come back with leverage. Money talks loudly in places that pretend to value integrity, and I realized she had paid him to make this problem disappear by making me disappear. I stood there in silence, my hands shaking, my chest tight, trying to process how easily my years of dedication had been erased. No investigation. No hearing. No protection for a teacher assaulted on school grounds. Just a quiet transaction behind closed doors, and I was the price. The mother walked past me on her way out with a look of pure satisfaction, as if she had won a game, and the door closed behind her with a finality that made my ears buzz. I walked out of the office in a daze. The hallway looked the same, the walls covered with children's drawings, the sound of lessons continuing behind closed doors, completely unaware that my life had just been upended. I packed my things slowly, mechanically, my hands moving on autopilot while my mind screamed that this could not be real. Colleagues watched in confusion as I left, unable to explain what had happened because I barely understood it myself. By the time I stepped outside, the shock fully settled in. I had been fired for refusing to admit guilt for something I did not do. Fired because I would not fund someone else's irresponsibility. Fired because I would not bow to insanity. I stood there on the steps of the school, clutching my bag, staring at the entrance where I had poured my time, energy, and care, utterly stunned that my career had been derailed for something so stupid, so unjust, and so painfully wrong. Update 2. The morning after I was fired, I sat in my apartment in stunned silence, the reality of what had happened pressing down on me like concrete. I kept telling myself it was just a bad dream, but it wasn't. It was real. I had lost my job, my reputation was smeared, and all because of a ridiculous accusation tied to a child's overfilled phone and a mother who weaponized entitlement. And a principal, no, a coward, who chose bribery and cover-ups over standing up for his staff. But I was not going to let it end like that. I was not going to be their victim. The next few days were a blur of research, phone calls, and legal consultations. I was lucky to find a lawyer who actually cared. His name was Dorian, and from the very first meeting, he listened to me not like I was just another client, but like someone who had truly been wrong. He believed me. And more than that, he knew how to make the truth rise to the surface. Together, we began collecting everything we could. Dorian filed a request to obtain surveillance footage from the school. At first, the administration tried to delay, claiming technical issues, but he pushed hard, filed formal motions, and eventually the footage surfaced. What it showed was indisputable. The mother yelling at me in the hallway. Her aggressive posture. Her raised hand. Me backing away in fear and running down the hall to call for help. The security guards stepping in between us. Everything aligned with my statement perfectly. But Dorian didn't stop there. He started digging into the financial background of the principal. And what he found was even worse than I imagined. The principal had a habit of taking, under the table, deals from parents in exchange for preferential treatment for their children, special grades, ignored misconduct, fast-tracked school transfers. It was all unofficial and always done verbally, but with just enough digital breadcrumbs to raise red flags. Venmo transactions with vague labels. Deposits made on the same day certain disciplinary cases were quietly dropped. One of the school accountants, anonymously, confirmed suspicions about money being slipped around in envelopes during off-record meetings. With evidence in hand, we filed a lawsuit against both the woman and the school principal. It was a hard battle. They had their own lawyers, they stalled, they tried to twist the narrative, to paint me as unstable, overly emotional, and resistant to authority. They claimed the phone damage was emotional for the child and I had triggered an unsafe educational environment. But what they didn't have was the footage. And they didn't have the mountain of inconsistencies Dorian had found in their financial records. The courtroom was packed on the final day of the hearing. The mother sat there pale and twitchy, her bravado replaced with nervous glances. The principal was stone-faced, clearly hoping to maintain some shred of control. But the judge had seen enough. The footage was undeniable. The financial trails were damning. The court ruled in my favor. The principal was dismissed from his position immediately, with a formal recommendation for the Board of Education to investigate him further. The mother was fined a massive sum for defamation, false accusations, and attempted extortion. A portion of that was awarded to me as moral compensation. It would not erase what happened, but it was a public acknowledgement that I had been wrong. That I was not crazy. That I had been targeted, framed, and humiliated for nothing. After the verdict was read, both the principal and the mother tried to corner me. Their expressions were desperate. They pleaded with me to withdraw the charges, to consider negotiating privately. They promised to pay me more if I would just make it all go away. They said they had families, careers, and futures. But I stood my ground. I told them there were lines that could not be uncrossed. That some things were not for sale, no matter how much money they shoved into the conversation. I walked out of that courtroom not as a victim, not as a disgraced teacher, but as someone who had clawed her way out of a rigged system and forced it to see the truth. It was not easy. It was humiliating. It was expensive. But it was worth it. Because they thought I would go quietly. They thought I would accept being labeled the problem. They thought they could buy their way into rewriting reality. But thanks to Dorian, thanks to the footage, thanks to my refusal to disappear, I got justice. I got the truth on record. And as I stepped onto the courthouse steps, I knew that even if I had lost a job, I had reclaimed something far more important, my voice. Update 3. It took less than 2 weeks after the court ruling for the school to make a public announcement that the principal had been permanently removed. No glowing farewell. No carefully crafted tribute about his years of service. Just a cold, clipped notice pinned to the bulletin board outside the front office and circulated to the staff via a short internal memo. His name was erased like a chalk mark in the rain, and the position was declared vacant with immediate effect. To say the school was shaken would be an understatement. Teachers who had once kept their heads down began to exchange hushed conversations in the corridors. Whispers of relief mixed with disbelief, because no one had expected him to fall, not like that, not so fast. Some had suspected the under-the-table dealings, others had chosen not to look, but now the truth had scorched through the silence, and it was undeniable. Within days, the district appointed a new interim director while they fast-tracked applications for a permanent replacement. I kept my distance during the transition. My lawyer advised me to return once the dust had settled, and though I wanted to rush back, I waited, choosing to be cautious even in victory. But the call came sooner than expected. The new director had been appointed, a man named Henrik, and from the very first staff meeting, I knew something had changed. Henrik did not come in pretending to be everyone's friend. He walked with quiet confidence, spoke with precision, and most importantly, listened. His first act was to meet with every staff member individually. He sat across from me, looked me in the eyes, and asked not what had happened, but how I had survived it. I could feel that he meant it. That he understood leadership was about protecting those who gave their lives to the profession. I told him everything. I left nothing out. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes. He simply listened. After that meeting, everything began to shift. The staff grew more energized, students picked up on the new atmosphere, and a weight none of us fully realized we were carrying began to lift. Policies were clarified, communication between administration and teachers improved, and Henrik made it clear that no one would be allowed to intimidate or threaten his team again. A silent wall had gone up between us and any parent who thought money or outrage could dictate policy. For the first time in months, I breathed freely. Still, I did not forget what had happened. I did not allow the warmth of this new chapter to soften my vigilance. So during my first full week back in the classroom, I made a point to sit down with each of my classes and remind them, clearly and firmly, that all homework was now and had always been available digitally. Every task, every resource, every instruction was accessible via the school's electronic portal. I pulled it up on the projector, walked them through it step by step, and reinforced that if they ever missed an assignment, it was not necessary to take photographs or borrow someone's phone. They had their own access. Their parents had their own access. Everything they needed could be reviewed at home. I could see the shift in their faces, the slow understanding settling in. Some had genuinely believed that taking photos of someone else's notebook was the only way to stay caught up. The previous administration had never prioritized digital transparency. Now, it became a cornerstone. I did not say why I emphasized it. I did not drag them into the ugliness that had consumed my life weeks earlier. But deep down I knew. I had to say it, not because the students needed the information, but because I needed the boundary. I needed to ensure there would never be another situation where a child's personal device became ammunition in a war against my dignity. I needed the next parent who considered storming into a school with accusations and demands to know that the school now had structure, order, and an administrator who would not buckle for the sake of appeasement. As the semester wore on, I found myself healing in small, subtle ways. I spent less time defending my methods and more time creating new lesson plans. I stopped flinching when I saw parents waiting at the door. I began to walk through the halls without that cold stone of fear in my chest. My colleagues reached out more often, thanked me for standing up, for refusing to be silenced. Some even told me that what I did gave them the courage to speak up too. The woman who started it all had disappeared from the school's radar. Her son had been quietly withdrawn from the class list, and no one mentioned her name. The community had seen her face in the papers. The court ruling had not been sealed. There was nothing left for her to cling to, no legacy to salvage. She had gambled on intimidation and lost everything. And as for the former principal, he faded out of relevance as quickly as he had once ruled with smug impunity. There were rumors of another job application, a failed reference check, and eventually silence. I no longer cared where he went. I no longer needed to know. What mattered was that justice had been served. That I was back in my classroom, teaching with integrity, surrounded by people who respected me. I had not just returned, I had reclaimed everything they tried to take from me. This story did not end in quiet acceptance. It ended with truth weaponized in the right direction. With evidence, with law, with fire that refused to die down. And it ended because someone, somewhere, like Henrik, like Dorian, like me, chose not to look away. It ended because I stood up and said no. Not this time. Not like this. And this time, the system actually listened.